Dear viewers, NRI community is growing. There are a lot of Indian bright students who go abroad, permanently stay abroad. They build up their careers. It creates a situation where the parents of these children are back home and they are getting older and they are worried about how our assets can be seamlessly transferred to our children after our time. It requires careful thought, it requires careful consideration and certain actions to make sure that this process is pretty smooth. In this episode, I am going to talk to expert of the week, estate planning specialist, Mr. Nikhil Varghese of Yellow. This is NRI Money Clinic for you, and I am Dr. Chandrakant Bhatt, your financial guide for a happy living.
NRI Money Clinic. No hype, just the right advice.
In this expert speak section, the expert of the week today is estate planning specialist is Mr. Nikhil Varghese. Mr. Nikhil Varghese by profession is a chartered accountant, a person with very good experience of decades together in working in estate planning. He has to his credit working for audit firms like EY and PwC in the past, and before he started his own Yellow, a startup to democratize the will creation and estate planning exercise. He was working as the South India head for a wealth management firm in India. He has done multiple episodes on our channel. He is one of the very popular faculty members here who makes things very simple for those people who are looking for services as well as solutions in the field of estate planning. Welcome to this yet another episode, Mr. Nikhil Varghese.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatt, for having me again in this conversation, and would love to have yet another interactive session with you and your audience.
Nikhil, let's get started. Estate planning is a vast subject. Let's restrict this to today for those parents whose children are NRIs who have no intention of coming back to India anytime soon, or maybe permanently they'll become the NRIs. What is the estate planning that needs to be done in case of parents of those whose children are NRIs?
So, like you said, estate planning is a vast subject. To stick to today's conversation, if I were to start from there, estate planning is essentially preparing for transfer of your wealth and your assets after your lifetime. Of course, you need to also see how to ensure that these assets are available for you during your thick and thin. But it's all about how it's available for you and how can it seamlessly transfer to your loved ones post your lifetime, right? But when it comes to NRI children, it becomes a little more tricky, complex to navigate, because there are international laws and regulations that one need to deal with. So from that standpoint, the goal specifically would be to ensure your hard-earned assets are distributed according to your wishes. That's point number one. And more importantly, without any legal hurdles and minimum tax and legal implications. That's the whole objective of how to go about with an estate planning, especially when you have NRI children.
Estate planning needs to be done. There is no escape from that. What are the key components of this estate planning? 1, 2, 3. How would you like to enlighten my audience on this?
Absolutely. No, there are several, elements, crucial elements rather, in the estate planning, right? The first and foremost, obviously, is to have a foundational document, which is nothing but a well-drafted will, right? This is the cornerstone of any estate plan. No matter which country you're looking at, it will becomes basics. But beyond that, if you want to consider setting up a trust, especially if you have substantial assets or if you have complex wishes, then trust can provide a little more control over how and when your assets are distributed. That's something which you can look at beyond the will. But having said that, apart from will and trust, what you could look at is whenever you set up a will or write your own will, you should ensure that the executor, or rather you have a good executor to your will or a trustee to your trust, who is someone who resides pretty much in India, because you're looking at Indian assets, your kids are abroad, remote situation, you want somebody who is more nearer to the assets to deal with the requirements, right? Therefore, given the geographical distance with NRI children, it becomes much more critical to handle the legal process more effectively by having a local executor to your will or a trustee to your trust. More importantly, it's also important that your NRI children are added as nominees. If that's somebody who's going to get your assets or your financial assets wherever possible, you should add them as nominees. This kind of simplifies the entire transfer process. It expedites the entire transfer process, and therefore having your nomination aligning with your will, one, makes things very clear. and give quick access to the NRI children. But more important, because NRI children may not, many a times that I've seen that, right? Many a time they may not have even a bank account in India. And therefore, transfer becomes a little critical. We should encourage NRI children to open NRO accounts in India, which is a non-resident, account, ordinary accounts in India. That will further facilitate an easy receipt of funds from resident Indian parents when the time actually comes, right? And last point here would be to keep assets more liquid in nature, more so because it's easily accessible and it is in particular much more beneficial for NRI heirs.
Nikhil, you specifically mentioned this liquidity aspect of maintaining the asset. Why it should remain liquid? What's your suggestion for the audience who's watching this program? How they can make it happen?
This is pretty much stemming from our experience, right? We have seen, parents with heavily invested in illiquid assets and then kids struggling later point of time to gain access, maintain these assets, etc., so on and so forth. And therefore, it's more coming from experience that, having liquidity becomes extremely crucial when it comes to estate planning, whenever there's NRI beneficiaries involved. What are the broad benefits that I can elaborate here? One, of course, ease of transfer, right? Liquid assets like cash in bank accounts or easily divestible or sellable investments like equity, mutual funds, any other capital market instruments can be transferred to NRI children with much more quickly, less paperwork and when compared to physical assets like real estate properties, commercial, agricultural, whatnot, right? It becomes much more simpler for transfer of assets. The second point would be more to avoid forced selling. Why does this occur? Because if you have estates which mainly consist of illiquid assets, again, properties, like I said earlier, it becomes very difficult for heirs to kind of gain access to it and also maintain this for a long period of time. And therefore, they tend to sell them off on unfavorable prices. And you and I know that when you want to sell, always you are on the, not on the good side. It's always a buyer's market, right? And it becomes very difficult to sell at a good price. And therefore, having liquid assets become much more easier for family members because you don't need to worry about these difficulties of maintaining these properties from a remote jurisdiction. Third important fact here would be that having liquid assets will bring flexibility for the NRI children. How flexibility? Because liquid assets give the NRI children options now. Whether you want to keep yourself invested in India, rather continue with the India growth story, or if you think, no, I'm not interested, I can't understand the requirement in India, they can easily repatriate these assets back to their home residence or resident country and meet their financial needs in their prevailing economic conditions in those countries, right? And that way it becomes much more flexible for family. And the fourth point here would be reduce legal complications for the kids. How? Transferring ownership of physical assets, like I said earlier, becomes very complex, including a lot of paperwork, physical presence and whatnot. But liquid assets are generally tend to involve very less processes and the whole process of transfer is much more simpler as compared to physical assets.
Estate planning itself is pretty complex in a large different areas itself. One problem that comes during the estate planning is today you have NRIs in almost all countries. A large chunk of them are in developed countries like US, UK, Canada, Singapore, Australia. The taxation of inheritance in India and in these countries are different. Is there anything that people can do keeping this taxation of inherited assets in the respective countries for these NRI children? What can be thought about in this line?
Of course, sir. Yeah, you rightly said, the tax complications, legal framework, regulatory framework, exchange control framework, these are things that impact when it comes to, again, multi-jurisdictional situations are involved, right? Like you said, estate planning itself is complex. Planning for this becomes very crucial. Technically speaking, from an India standpoint, inheritance itself is not taxed. Right? If you receive any asset, be it from relative, non-relative, no tax implications are arising your way. If you were to receive it by way of inheritance, at least this is as per the current laws, right? But once you receive these assets, incomes generated from there on will of course be taxable, including capital gains will go back to cost of previous owner. What do I mean here is, for instance, say if I received certain assets by way of inheritance, I don't see the value of that asset as on the date of I received the inheritance, but at what price the actual owner purchased it. Therefore, tomorrow when I sell it, that becomes the cost basis. Whatever the sale price, less that cost is what I'll make capital gains. And that's how India taxes. However, the same implications in offshore jurisdictions in their home countries needs to be looked at because there the tax implication could be different. Typically speaking, receiving amounts by way of inheritance, barring few countries, there is no tax per se unless you receive it from a resident of that particular jurisdiction. What do I mean here is that if I, as a Indian resident, were to pass on my assets to my kids, say as a US citizen, there is no inheritance tax. But if I'm a US citizen and these assets gets passed on to my children who are also whether US, non-US citizen, then there could be potential inheritance tax. Whether the asset is in US or it is in India, it doesn't matter. All your global assets are exposed. So that's something which we need to look at. But like I said, from a tax perspective, broadly, if you look at it, any incomes arising will be taxable in the hands of in the India. And if those incomes are also taxable in offshore jurisdictions, then that's one we need to look at from which jurisdiction that we're talking about. Typically, the tax paid in India is available as a credit for those incomes which are arising in India, in your home country as well. Now, that's where the double taxation avoidance agreements, etc. comes in place. Very fact-specific scenarios, each country needs to be evaluated on a case-to-case basis. But more importantly, if you go beyond tax, there is also RBI regulations or exchange control regulations that is relevant from an India context, wherein RBI restricts amount of assets that can be repatriated, which you have inherited from your parents. As NRI children, it becomes very critical because even though you have inherited, say, large chunk of money, RBI only permits you to take $1 million per financial year out of these inherited assets. And for that also, there's good amount of proper procedures that one need to follow before these assets can be pulled up. Aspects like having a NRI account, etc. really helps in having these proceeds received. But the point being that these are aspects that one need to look at. Sometimes even parents, while you have NRI children, parents in India also think, how do I send money to US? Or to any offshore jurisdiction? There are restrictions in terms of parents being able to gift only up to, say, $250,000 as a gift per year per individual, right? And that's something, these are implications that one need to keep in mind when we look at from a cross-border tax and regulatory scenario.
Nikhil, these are the days of do-it-yourself investors, do-it-yourself Zaman. From the kind of complexities you spoke around the estate planning, for me, it appears that it is not possible for anyone to do it yourself. Also, I get a feeling that probably it is a multidisciplinary approach and probably somebody has to specialize into estate planning. You have been in this line for more than 15 years now. If somebody wants to do an estate planning and take the right decision, which are the professionals who need to be involved in it and how one can ensure that they take the right decision and leave no gap in their estate plan? What's the procedure to go about?
You're absolutely right. No, it is actually pretty complex, and few things can be done DIY, not everything, right? When it comes to regulations, etc., it's always best to take professional guidance because you don't want to be be in the wrong side of the law, because you may end up doing things saying it's obvious, why should there be an issue? But end of the day, you don't want notices coming from tax and EDs with respect to you not complying with the required regulations, right? So therefore, like you rightly said, I strongly recommend working with professionals, especially on cross-border scenarios. Now, if we look at who are the kind of professionals that you need to deal with, obviously from an estate planning perspective, you need to deal with certain experts specializing in international estate planning. Because now the person needs to know, because you're looking at parents in one jurisdiction, children in another jurisdiction, you need to have a flair of how the jurisdictional complexities work. And therefore, working with an expert, having experience in international estate planning will be very crucial. Second, the kind of professional that you need to probably deal with is chartered accountant who are familiar with both Indian and international tax laws, right? Again, at least if they don't undertake the compliance, they can at least guide you saying what needs to be done so that you at least know better perspective than doing things on your own, because there are high possibility that if you don't know these things, you may go on the wrong side of the law and then being non-compliant. And the last thing could be to have very good financial advisor along with you who can, there's more for parents in India who can give you the right investment strategy depending on your requirements, objectives to have assets that are multiplying, but also meeting the liquidity needs of your family, so that end of the day, it's not you do these things in silo. All these needs to come along together, and then that's how a effective financial or estate plan for a family kind of happens, right? That's how you look at as a comprehensive estate plan for a family, taking two aspects: legal, financial, and more importantly, practical aspects, which makes things much more robust for you.
Nikhil, the idea of this episode is to draw the attention of our viewers to do the estate planning well ahead of time and in a right way. Before I let you go, can you take us through a synopsis or a summary of what you said for the audience? Because I know it's a complex subject. 1, 2, 3, 4 things. What audience have to keep in mind?
Absolutely. I would say the quick takeaways from this would be that start planning early. Very important. Estate planning is not something that you leave until the last minute. It's something that you should have done as of yesterday. 2 could be prioritize liquidity in your asset allocation, like I said earlier, but maintain a balanced portfolio for yourself, right? That's important to meet your objectives, but having liquidity as a priority becomes important more so from the ease of access for your children. 3rd could be keep your documents organized, ensure these information about those documents are available with your NRI children so that they know where to find when the time comes. 4th could be regularly review and update your estate plan, especially after major life-changing events, changes in your family, changes in your asset scenario. Then you should look at updating. Typically, what I advise my clients is that at least once in a year, look at your estate planning documents. Could be a will, trust, whatnot. If nothing needs to be done, great. At least you have peace of mind. If not, it's time that you go back and update your document. And the 5th aspect would be communication. Communication is extremely crucial when it comes to anything that we're talking about here. Discuss your plans very openly with your children if possible, because last minute surprises is what results in one, loss of assets, and more importantly, conflicts between siblings at a later point in time. Why do you want to get there? If you have the opportunity to have a conversation, have that open conversation. If not, at least somebody should know about the existence of the estate plan. The last thing that you want is that you do all of this and family has no clue about what you have done and they assume that there's nothing has been done and start as if there's no estate plan in place, right? The important point here, like a final takeaway from my end, would be that the important aspect here would be that for you, for everybody here, is that the goal is to leave a legacy and not a burden for your children, right? With a proper planning, you can ensure your hard-earned assets are benefiting your NRI children as you intended it, right? And it should not be a burden tomorrow that after you're gone, your children blaming you saying, why was there such a mess that I have to deal with now, right? With that note, I think that'd be a good way to kind of take away for the audience here in terms of why this is extremely crucial, because if your assets are not going to the intended person in a smooth fashion, it is always going to be a burden for your children, and therefore planning early becomes extremely crucial.
Nikhil, thank you very much for all these thoughts and enlightening my audience on the need of this estate planning. I keep calling you again and again. We look for solutions people are searching for. And thank you very much for your kindness to come on my show, share all these inputs for the benefit of our audience. I remain in gratitude to you for your kindness. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatt, to again invite me and have this conversation with you and your audience. I know we have kind of touched upon the surface. We can't get into nitty-gritty, then you need to speak for hours around this, right? But that said, if there are any specific requirement, obviously your audience can reach out to you and, the right advice can be given. But that said, thank you so much for having me on board. Look forward to having many more such conversations with you and your audience. Thank you so much.
Dear viewers, hope the video I've done today with the expert of the week, Mr. Nikhil Varghese, gave you the reason why you should be looking at estate planning as early as possible for smooth transfer of these assets which are held by you to your NRI children. If it did give you the right direction, please do give me a thumbs up. For those of you who are yet to subscribe for the channel, please hit that subscribe button now and press the bell icon. Do not forget to share these videos with your near and dear ones, friends and relatives, and on all the WhatsApp groups on which you are connected with. Thank you very much for watching this episode on NRI Money Clinic. I will be back with you next Tuesday with yet another expert with yet another topic. Till then, stay safe. Jai Hind.
Press the bell icon for more details and subscribe our channel.